The first case came to us as a frantic, encrypted file from a former programmer named Marcus Thorne. He had been a low-level analyst for a major telecommunications firm, one that handled the backbone of America's mobile networks. His job was simple: debug the dead zones. But one zone, a small, seemingly unremarkable valley town in rural Oregon called Cedar Creek, was different. It wasn't a geological dead zone, it was a null zone. Marcus explained that a dead zone is where the signal just can't reach. A null zone is where the signal should be at maximum strength, yet it is systematically and instantly nullified. It was like an invisible, mile-wide digital vacuum cleaner. Every team sent to investigate returned with the same blank data, the same shrugged shoulders. The town, however, was thriving. Perfect wooden houses, a pristine main street, and a community completely disconnected from the digital world. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no landlines. The residents were friendly, almost aggressively so, and claimed they simply preferred to be unplugged. Marcus's job was to fix it. He flew a military-grade drone equipped with experimental signal-emitting tech right over the town square. The drone's feed abruptly cut out, not with a static burst, but a clean, silent black. When he hiked in to retrieve it, he found the drone on the town's common green, untouched. Its internal memory chip was wiped clean, except for one file: a 5-second, low-resolution video. The video was taken from the drone's perspective right before it failed. It showed the smiling, waving faces of the townspeople, all looking directly up at the camera. In the middle of the crowd stood a figure, a tall, emaciated man in a dark suit, his skin unnaturally pale. But it wasn't the man that froze Marcus's blood. It was his gesture. The figure slowly raised his hand, and with an almost theatrical elegance, he pinched his index finger and thumb together, the universal sign for cut. The feed went dead immediately after. Marcus packed his bags that night, but he didn't leave the valley. He checked into the only motel just outside the null zone boundary, obsessed with the idea that the entire town was an experiment, a social black box run by an organization far above his old employer. He started noticing anomalies. The same people left town at the same time every morning and returned at the same time every evening, driving identical, unmarked black sedans. They never made eye contact outside the town limits. He saw no children, no elderly, just the unnervingly fit and happy middle-aged. His paranoia reached its peak when he managed to rig a high-frequency acoustic recorder right on the null zone boundary. He left it running for 3 days. When he played the recording back, there was no hum, no town noise, just absolute silence for 71 hours straight. Then a sudden burst of sound. It wasn't human speech. It was a cacophony of metallic, grinding, rhythmic clicks, like a million tiny gears turning in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Then, a single, clear whisper, not in English, but a language Marcus couldn't place. It sounded like air escaping from a pressure vessel, a soft, high hiss that repeated 2 words. He ran the sound through a spectral analysis program. The program failed to translate the words, but it did flash one message in the corner of his screen, over and over. Synchronicity. Critical. The next morning, Marcus's rental car was gone. All his equipment was still in his motel room, but the car and his briefcase with the original drone footage were completely missing. When he reported the theft to the local sheriff's office, the deputy was the spitting image of the man who had pinched his fingers in the drone video. The deputy just smiled, a wide, unsettling smile, and said, "Are you sure, son? Maybe you just forgot where you parked it." Everything is just fine in Cedar Creek. Marcus left on foot, never looking back. But as he looked over his shoulder at the town sign receding into the distance, he saw something new. Fixed just beneath the old wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Cedar Creek," was a small, sleek, silver plaque, almost invisible in the morning light. It had one word etched into the metal. This file was recovered by a journalist who vanished a week later. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of a military base in the American Midwest. This one chills me because of its sheer predictability. The story of a place trying to swallow a soldier whole. The protagonist, a young Air Force Reserve engineer named Staff Sergeant Elena, or Ellie Reyes, was deployed to an old, decommissioned Cold War missile silo complex in South Dakota, repurposed as a secure data center. The facility, known as Site 404, was notorious for its structural instability and persistent, baffling power fluctuations. Ellie's team was tasked with mapping the complex's oldest sublevels, parts that hadn't been accessed since the early 70s. These levels, 300 feet beneath the planes, were not built for data. They were for something else. Thick concrete walls, airlocks with ancient rusting mechanisms, and a constant bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the environmentals. On the third day, while mapping sublevel 5, their LiDAR scanners started malfunctioning. The laser pulses, which should have mapped the walls, were instead showing a moving wall. A dense, shifting block of matter right at the end of a long, unmarked corridor. Ellie, a skeptic by nature, assumed it was a massive subterranean water leak. Her commanding officer ordered them to drill a core sample. The drilling rig, designed to punch through granite, struggled. After 3 hours of deafening, grinding noise, the drill bit finally broke through. A rush of foul, metallic-smelling air instantly flooded the sealed tunnel. No water, no gas, just air that tasted like wet pennies and old iron. Then the sound started. It was faint at first, barely audible over the remaining equipment hum. A rhythmic, soft thud, thud, thud. Ellie put her ear to the drill hole. The thudding stopped. She pulled back, and the sound immediately resumed, slightly louder this time. It was a clear, steady pulse, like a massive, organic heart beating somewhere within the newly breached space. Her team packed up, spooked but still professional. They sealed the hole with an industrial polymer and reported an unidentifiable structural anomaly and unusual gas pressure. The next day, the polymer seal was cracked down the middle, not exploded, but split as if by a massive, precise force from the other side. And the sound was louder. This time, it wasn't a thud. It was a series of quick, uneven scratches, like fingernails desperately raking concrete. And then a sound that made every man and woman on her team drop their tools. A clear, labored breathing, heavy and wet, right at the surface of the sealed hole. Ellie volunteered to run a thermal imaging scan of the wall. She set the camera up, focused on the crack, and watched the screen. The image showed a patch of intense heat, a handprint clearly defined, pressed against the inside of the 3-foot-thick concrete. But the temperature of the handprint was not human. It was an impossible, searing 450 degrees Celsius. The print slowly faded, leaving a visible scorch mark on the inner wall. The last reading she took before the system completely overloaded showed a single line of text running across the thermal imaging display, a piece of code that should not have been there, in a font that looked hand-typed. I told them to leave the doors shut. Ellie was immediately airlifted out of Site 404, separated from her team, and processed in a secure debriefing facility in Nebraska. The last thing she remembers seeing before the heavy medication took effect was the face of the attending psychiatrist. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the blank white wall above her head, a bead of cold sweat running down his temple, and whispering a sentence that would later be redacted from her official file. It's not a bunker. It's a cage. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by a government subcontractor who quit his job and sold everything he owned. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of the internet, involving a piece of cursed technology.
This is a digital haunt, a new kind of curse tailored for the 21st century's lonely glow. A popular but underground video streamer known only by his handle Static Junkie specialized in analog horror, finding defunct, obscure, or legally dubious content from ancient VHS tapes, forgotten radio transmissions, or declassified satellite feeds. He had a small but rabid fan base who loved the grainy, unpredictable terror of his finds. One night, Static Junkie received a massive, untraceable data dump. It contained a single, looping video file, simply titled Face 2.mp4. The video was 8 seconds long, filmed in the harsh, fluorescent lighting of an empty public library after hours. It showed nothing but a static shot of a book return slot. The video's only audio was a high-pitched, almost subliminal frequency that felt more like a headache than a sound. Static Junkie, ever the showman, decided to play the loop for his audience. As the video started, the camera on his desk suddenly refocused itself, even though it was a fixed lens model. It focused on the reflection in his computer monitor, not his face, but a second face, overlaid on his own. This second face was not a ghost or effect. It was simply wrong. A human skull shape, but the eyes were unnaturally wide black voids, and the mouth was a thin, vertical seam. The expression was not malice or terror, but an unsettling, overwhelming confusion. His stream viewers immediately started spamming the chat with a mix of terror and excitement, thinking it was a brilliant new effect. But Static Junkie hadn't added anything. He looked down, saw the reflection, and his stream's audio, which had been perfectly clear, suddenly became a distorted, choked mess. He reached for the mouse to stop the video, but as his fingers touched the desk, he felt a shocking jolt, not electrical, but a cold, deep vibration. The second face on the screen blinked. The wide, black eyes did not move, but the vertical seam of the mouth opened just enough for a single, small, perfectly white object to slide out and drop onto the desk in the reflection. Static Junkie, heart pounding, looked at his real desk. Nothing. The reflection was showing something that wasn't there. He looked back at the screen, and the second face was gone, replaced by his own terrified reflection. He ended the stream, claiming a technical glitch. But his nightmares began that night. He would wake up to the sound of that high-pitched frequency and the feeling of the cold, deep vibration in his bed. He stopped streaming, but the file face2.mp4 refused to be deleted. He tried formatting the drive, replacing the OS. It would instantly reappear. Desperate, he burned his computer and all external drives. He bought a brand new, sterile machine. As he finished the clean installation of the operating system, a hidden file appeared in the root folder, time-stamped to the moment he first powered on the new machine. The file was face2.mp4. But this time, the 8-second loop had changed. It still showed the book return slot, but now a small, white, perfectly straight finger was slowly retracting back into the slot, leaving a faint, oily smudge on the metal. The audio was still the high-pitched frequency, but interwoven with it, barely audible, was a child's voice, played backwards, repeating one simple, horrific sentence. "You can't close the book, Static, until the pages are finished." This story was shared with Watchman Tales by a former fan who swears the loop started appearing in his own video files 1 week ago. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of the Deep South, an artifact of forgotten history and an obsession that destroys.
The oldest fears are the best fears. They leave no fingerprints, only dust and madness. Dr. Alastair Finch was a renowned historian of obscure American colonial archaeology, specifically focused on a period of Spanish exploration off the coast of Florida that predated all official records. His obsession was the legend of the Sunken King's Vault, a rumored trove of heretical artifacts lost in a hurricane in the late 1500s. He found it, not in the ocean, but buried 20 miles inland in a swampy section of the Florida Everglades, a place so remote even the local hunters avoided it. The vault was a massive, waterlogged wooden chest bound in copper chains. Inside, there was no gold, only a single artifact, a perfectly smooth, black obsidian mirror, about the size of a dinner plate. It was too cold to the touch, constantly. The mirror was not reflective in the way glass is. It was absorbent. Light and color seemed to fall into it and vanish. Alastair's initial research revealed a horrific history. It was an artifact supposedly used in an indigenous ritual to trade a year of one's life for a minute of true sight. He mocked the notion, but brought the mirror back to his private study. His doctoral student, a young woman named Leah, noticed the immediate change in him. He stopped sleeping, and his once sharp mind became clouded. He spent hours simply staring into the obsidian surface, which he claimed was beginning to show impressions. Not reflections, but imprints of the place it was found. A humid, black swamp populated by figures that were too tall and too thin to be human. One afternoon, she found him in his study, sitting completely still. He had meticulously covered every single reflective surface in the room with sheets of black velvet. The only thing left uncovered was the obsidian mirror. He looked up at Leah, and she saw it. The skin around his eyes was paper-thin, drawn tight, and his eyes were bloodshot. He whispered to her, his voice a dry rasp. "They're afraid of the light, Leah. They're afraid to be seen." He told her he'd made his first trade, 1 minute of true sight. When she asked what he saw, he only pointed a trembling finger at the mirror. The mirror, which had always been black, now had a single, faint, shimmering reflection on its surface, a picture of Leah standing in the doorway, but her image was 2 weeks older, her face gaunt and pale, with a look of desperate, hollow-eyed fear. Alastair then revealed his final log entry, typed just an hour earlier. It detailed his plan to make the final trade, his remaining life for permanent, true sight. Leah tried to stop him, but he was gone. She only found a note pinned to the obsidian mirror. It was written in Alastair's hand, but the handwriting was erratic and spiky, almost frantic. The note read, "The sunken king is no metaphor, Leah. He's just waiting to trade up from a vault to a vessel, and I just gave him the keys." When the police arrived, Alastair was nowhere to be found. The study was exactly as Leah had left it, every surface covered in black velvet, except for the single, now brightly shining obsidian mirror. Leah approached it slowly. She couldn't help but look at her reflection. It was her own terrified face, but in the background a shadow moved. It wasn't the police. It was a tall, thin figure with a crown of dried swamp moss. It stepped closer to her image, and then, slowly, a long, bony finger tapped the surface of the mirror from the inside. This artifact was last catalogued in the evidence room of a small Florida sheriff's department, but the box is now officially listed as empty and cold to the touch. Now let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of the American high desert, a new form of alien encounter.
They've stopped taking people. Now they're taking the blueprints of reality itself. This is the story of a disillusioned physicist, Dr. Harlan Wells, who left his comfortable university job to track high-desert radio anomalies in rural Nevada. Harlan wasn't looking for little green men. He was looking for a pattern break, a mathematical impossibility that proved the laws of physics were incomplete. He set up an array of custom-built receiving dishes along a desolate stretch of road known as Route 79, right on the edge of a massive unlisted parcel of government land. For weeks, his equipment recorded nothing but static and satellite chatter, until a Tuesday afternoon at 3:03 a.m. The anomaly was not a signal, it was an anti-signal. A perfect 99.999% vacuum of all electromagnetic noise, lasting exactly 47 seconds. When the noise returned, Harlan's equipment had recorded a single complex pattern, a sequence of prime numbers, recursive fractal equations, and right at the end, a recognizable 12-bit string of binary code. It was a perfectly rendered blueprint for something. The next night, the anti-signal hit again, precisely at 3:03 a.m. for 47 seconds. This time, the resulting pattern was a complete, accurate schematic for a human brain, showing every neuron, every synapse, and every memory, all laid out as a flowchart. Harlan realized what was happening. Something was using the silence to collect the underlying patterns of existence. The first night was the blueprint of a physical law. The second was the blueprint of a consciousness. What would be next? On the third night, Harlan waited. He set up a high-powered surveillance camera aimed at the empty stretch of desert road where the anomaly seemed to originate. At 3:03 a.m., the silence dropped. The camera feed showed nothing. But then, as the seconds ticked by, the very reality of the road began to glitch. The yellow dividing lines didn't just flicker, they re-rendered themselves, shifting slightly in thickness and color, like a poorly processed video game texture. A tumbleweed rolled across the frame, then instantly snapped back to its original position, then rolled again, creating a time loop that lasted for 3 full seconds. The anti-signal ended. Harlan checked his equipment. The new pattern was horrific, a complete abstract representation of human emotion. Fear, joy, rage, all reduced to wave functions and scalar fields, a cold, inhuman calculus of the soul. He couldn't stand the thought of what was coming on the fourth night. The blueprint of humanity, the core pattern of the planet. He decided to interfere. He strapped a custom-built, powerful electromagnetic pulse emitter to the back of his truck. His plan was to blast a random, chaotic signal, a pure, unmathematical noise, right into the heart of the void. He drove to the spot on Route 79, parked, and waited. At 3:02 a.m., the air grew thick and heavy. The stars seemed to dim. He activated the EMP emitter. The machine whined, charging up the huge capacitors. The anti-signal hit at 3:03 a.m. The silence was suffocating, instantly killing the sound of his engine, his pulse, his breath. He slammed the activation button on the EMP emitter. A massive blinding flash erupted from the machine, but it wasn't the chaotic signal he intended. It was a single, perfect burst of light, and in the space of that flash, Harlan saw something on the road. Not a physical object, but a shape of pure colorless light towering 30 feet high. The light shape was bent over his truck, and it was holding a massive invisible net that was slowly tightening around the air above his vehicle. When the light shape recoiled from the blast, the perfect silence was instantly replaced by a sound that wasn't on Earth. It was a deep, wet, satisfied sigh right in his ear. Harlan drove away, his truck sputtering back to life. His EMP emitter was gone. In its place, simply sitting on the empty steel mount on the back of his truck, was a small, smooth, metallic sphere. He picked it up. It was warm. He brought it back to his lab and ran a scanner over it. It wasn't made of any known element. It was a pure pattern, the entire schematic of his EMP emitter now condensed into physical form. And etched on the surface, too small to see with the naked eye, was a single repeating symbol, an asterisk inside a circle, the universal mathematical symbol for completion. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by a man who now only speaks in repeating, recursive sentences, a pattern he cannot break.
You've seen their stories, but the darkness has only just begun.